Awareness is one of the most dangerous tools in the world because once you have it, nothing looks the same again. Think about it. How many times in your life have you looked back at a situation and said to yourself, if I only knew then what I know now? That's the difference awareness makes. It doesn't just change what you see, it changes what you allow, what you tolerate, and what you engage in. Once a man becomes aware of the strategies that have been used against him, the tricks lose their power. A magician's act stops being magical the second you understand the illusion, and the same goes for human behavior. Once the curtain is pulled back, the show isn't the same anymore. The power of awareness is that it removes the element of surprise. When you don't know what's happening, you get blindsided. You react out of emotion, you make decisions based on pressure, and you allow things to slide because you can't quite put your finger on what feels off. But the moment you know, the moment you have language for it, the moment you can identify the tactic being used against you, everything slows down. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of getting caught up in it, you step outside of it. Awareness creates distance, and in that distance, power is born. Men who lack awareness often give away control without even realizing it. They allow guilt to push them into decisions, shame to keep them silent, and fear of conflict to keep them compliant. They don't see the patterns, so they think every situation is isolated, every argument is unique, every demand is just a momentary thing. But once awareness kicks in, the patterns become obvious. You start seeing that the same tactic has been used 10 times before. You recognize that the random outburst happens at the exact same moment every time. Suddenly, you can predict it before it even happens. And prediction is the foundation of control. Awareness also strips away confusion. Confusion is the #1 tool of manipulation. If someone can keep you questioning yourself, second-guessing what you saw, doubting your instincts, then they can control you without much effort. But when a man becomes aware, confusion has no place to hide. You're no longer wondering, am I imagining this? You know what's happening, you know what it looks like, and you know how it works. That certainty anchors you, and when you're anchored, you can't be moved around like a pawn on a board. Another layer of awareness is emotional intelligence. It's not just knowing what's happening outside of you, but also inside of you. Why do certain words trigger you? Why does silence bother you? Why does approval feel so important? Once you become aware of your own emotional buttons, you stop letting other people press them at will. You stop giving them access to your peace of mind. That level of awareness makes you unshakable, because no matter what storm comes at you, you know exactly where the weak points are and you've already reinforced them. Here's the truth. Awareness changes posture. A man who doesn't know walks into a room differently than a man who knows. The unaware man is looking for direction, approval, and permission. The aware man is looking for patterns, signals, and motives. One is waiting to be told what's going on, the other already knows. That shift in posture alone changes how people treat you. They can sense it, they can feel it, they know you're not the same as before, and when people realize they can't trick you, they stop trying. Awareness demands a new level of respect without ever having to ask for it. The most important part of awareness is that it can't be reversed. Once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see, you can't unsee. It's like learning to read. Letters stop being random shapes and forever become words. In the same way, manipulation stops being random drama and forever becomes a recognizable pattern. That's why awareness is so powerful, and that's why once men gain it, the entire game shifts in their favor. The second a man develops awareness, the very next step is boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that tell people how far they can go, what's acceptable, and what will never be tolerated. Without boundaries, you're an open field. Anyone can walk in, plant what they want, and take what they please. With boundaries, you're a fortress. Entry requires respect, effort, and alignment. And here's the thing, once a man sets his boundaries, they are no longer up for debate. They become non-negotiable, because bending them once teaches others that bending them is possible. But when they're firm, they create clarity, safety, and respect that no amount of persuasion can shake. Boundaries are not about control. They're about protection. Too many men confuse saying yes with being kind, when in reality, endless yeses just drain you dry. A man who never says no isn't generous. He's exhausted. He's carrying burdens that don't belong to him, responsibilities he never agreed to, and expectations he never set. The absence of boundaries is what creates resentment, bitterness, and burnout. But once boundaries are established, resentment disappears because you no longer give what you don't want to give, and you no longer accept what you don't want to accept. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They're doors that you control, deciding who enters and how long they stay. Here's where the real shift happens. When boundaries are clear, people reveal themselves. The moment you enforce a limit, you see who respects you and who only respects what they can get from you. Some people disappear when boundaries appear, and that's not a loss, that's clarity. If someone only values you when you're convenient, then setting boundaries simply exposes the truth that was already there. Respectful people adapt to your boundaries. Selfish people resist them. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know about where they stand in your life. Boundaries also build self-respect. Every time you enforce one, you're telling yourself, I matter. You're reinforcing that your time, your energy, your peace, and your values are worth protecting. Without boundaries, you're constantly betraying yourself just to keep the peace with others. But with boundaries, you no longer sacrifice yourself for approval. You no longer bend until you break. You stand straight, you stand tall, and people can see it in your posture, your tone, your presence. Boundaries are the physical evidence of self-worth. And once you develop them, you stop asking for respect. You command it. The beauty of boundaries is that they simplify life. When you don't have them, you're constantly negotiating, constantly debating, constantly exhausted by the push and pull of other people's demands. Every request becomes a moral dilemma. Every interaction becomes a drain. But with boundaries, decisions are quick. You don't have to wonder if you should say yes, because your limits already exist. You don't have to guess if someone crossed the line because the line is already drawn. Boundaries remove the gray areas, and life gets much lighter when the gray fades into black and white. Another hidden strength of boundaries is that they don't just protect you from others, they protect you from yourself. How many men have said yes to things they knew deep down would drain them? How many have ignored their own instincts just to avoid conflict? Boundaries are the safety net that stop you from self-sabotage. They prevent you from overcommitting, from overgiving, from over-explaining. They stop you from betraying yourself in the moment just to avoid discomfort. Boundaries aren't just rules for others. They're rules you set for yourself to make sure you honor who you are, even when it's inconvenient. Once a man realizes the power of boundaries, he stops seeing them as optional. They become non-negotiable because he knows the cost of not having them. He knows what it feels like to be drained, disrespected, and dismissed. He knows what it feels like to be stretched so thin that he barely recognizes himself. And he knows that life on the other side of boundaries feels lighter, calmer, and stronger. That's why boundaries aren't just suggestions. They're requirements, and once they're in place, the entire dynamic of every relationship changes. Control in any relationship is rarely obvious. It doesn't always come in the form of orders or demands. Most of the time, it shows up as small nudges, subtle pressures, quiet expectations that pile up until one person is carrying all the weight without realizing it. When a man is unaware, control slips through his fingers. He reacts to moods, bends to pressure, and adjusts himself just to keep things calm. But once awareness hits, once he can see the tactics for what they are, control shifts instantly. The very power that used to keep him tied up starts to dissolve because you cannot be held by strings you've already cut. The shift begins when a man stops reacting emotionally. Manipulation thrives on reaction. If you can make someone angry, guilty, or defensive, you can control them. But when a man sees the pattern, he doesn't react the same way anymore. Instead of snapping back, he pauses. Instead of giving in, he stays still. That stillness is power because it removes the leverage the other person had. The moment he refuses to be baited, the moment he refuses to play into the trap, the balance of control moves to him without a single word spoken. This new control doesn't come from force, it comes from clarity. Clarity is like turning the lights on in a dark room. Suddenly, every corner is visible, every move is predictable, and nothing can sneak past unnoticed. When a man has clarity, he doesn't need to argue or prove a point. He simply sees what's happening and makes decisions based on truth instead of pressure, and that truth eliminates confusion. Confusion is the hook that keeps men stuck, but clarity cuts the line. And once the line is cut, he's free to walk in the direction he chooses instead of being pulled in the direction someone else chooses. Control also shifts when a man learns the difference between influence and manipulation. Influence is natural in every relationship. It's the healthy give and take of two people affecting each other. Manipulation is when influence becomes one-sided, when one person gains at the expense of the other. Before awareness, it's easy to confuse the two. But once a man can tell the difference, manipulation stops being effective. He no longer mistakes pressure for love, guilt for care, or silence for strength. He sees the difference, and in that moment, the person who used to hold control loses their grip completely. Another layer to this shift is posture. Control isn't just about decisions, it's about presence. An unaware man walks into a situation already unsure, already doubting himself, already ready to give in. A man who understands control carries himself differently. His shoulders are straighter, his voice steadier, his eyes clearer. He doesn't need to fight for power, he already owns it in the way he carries himself. And people feel that. They can sense when someone won't bend, won't break, won't be moved by cheap tactics. Posture communicates what words don't have to, and when posture changes, control follows. The most powerful part of this instant shift is that it doesn't require permission. You don't need to announce it, you don't need to argue for it, you don't even need to explain it. Control shifts the moment you decide you're not playing the same game anymore. The rules no longer apply because you're not participating in them. Silence becomes a weapon, restraint becomes strength, and consistency becomes unshakable. You don't take control by force, you take it by refusing to give it away. And the instant that happens, the dynamics turn in your favor without a single confrontation. And finally, control shifts instantly because knowledge cannot be unseen. Once you know what's happening, you can't go back to being blind. The buttons that used to be pushed no longer work. The traps that used to catch you no longer hold you. The cycles that used to drain you no longer repeat. The power flips immediately because what was once invisible is now obvious. And when something is obvious, it loses its grip. That's why the second awareness kicks in. Control doesn't slowly change, it snaps, and the man who was once powerless becomes the one holding the reins. Illusion is the oldest trick in the book. It's how people hide motives, disguise intentions, and make things appear one way when in reality, they're another. Illusion works because it creates doubt. It makes you question your instincts, second-guess your choices, and wonder if what you're seeing is even real. But the second clarity enters the picture, the illusion collapses. You can't be fooled by smoke once you've seen the fire that caused it. That's why clarity is one of the most powerful tools a man can carry, because it doesn't just give you answers, it strips away the lies that were designed to confuse you. Clarity is like putting on glasses after living with blurry vision. Suddenly, everything sharpens. The behaviors that didn't make sense before now connect into patterns. The excuses that used to sound believable now fall flat. The situations that once kept you up at night no longer carry weight because you finally see them for what they are. Illusion thrives in vagueness, but clarity thrives in definition. Once something is defined, it can't manipulate you anymore. Once you've named it, you can't be tricked by it because the unknown is where illusion hides and clarity eliminates the unknown. A man without clarity often lives in circles. He keeps replaying the same conversations, the same arguments, the same doubts, hoping one day they'll finally make sense. He gives endless chances because he doesn't know if his instincts are right. He stays stuck because he can't tell the difference between truth and performance. But when clarity hits, the circles break. You stop running in loops because you see the path straight ahead. The endless questions end because clarity doesn't give you more confusion. It gives you certainty, and certainty is what sets you free from the mental trap of illusion. Clarity also creates confidence in decision-making. When you're under illusion, every choice feels like a gamble. You don't know if walking away is overreacting or if staying is wasting your time. You don't know if speaking up will solve the problem or just start another fight. But when clarity cuts through, the fog lifts. You don't just guess, you know. You don't just hope, you decide. And those decisions are no longer rooted in fear, but in truth. Illusion makes you hesitate. Clarity makes you act. That action alone is what flips the power in your favor, because indecision always benefits the person creating the illusion. Another strength of clarity is that it exposes motives. Illusion is built to mask intent. It makes selfishness look like sacrifice, control look like care, and pressure look like love. But clarity unmasks it all. You see the difference between words and actions, promises and patterns, apologies and change. Once motives are exposed, it's no longer about what someone says, it's about what they do. And when you focus on actions over illusions, you can't be trapped by empty performances. You start holding people accountable, not for how they present themselves, but for how they consistently show up. Clarity also strengthens self-trust. The reason illusion works so well is because it gets you to doubt your own perception. It makes you question, am I crazy? Am I imagining this? Am I being too harsh? But once you gain clarity, those questions stop. You no longer fight with yourself because you know what you know, and that self-trust becomes a shield. The moment you trust your own perception, no one can gaslight you, confuse you, or twist your reality. You no longer need validation to believe what you see, because clarity has already confirmed it for you. And the best part of clarity is its permanence. Once you see the truth, you can't go back to believing the illusion. The curtain doesn't close again, the mask doesn't fit again, the performance doesn't convince you again. That's why clarity cuts so deep. It doesn't just reveal what's false, it makes the false impossible to accept ever again. Illusion depends on ignorance, but clarity destroys ignorance forever. Once a man has clarity, the games that used to work lose their power completely, and the illusions that once held him lose their grip instantly. Confidence is the game changer, because once a man develops it, the tactics that used to work on him stop working completely. Manipulation feeds on insecurity. It feeds on doubt, on fear, on the need for approval. When you're unsure of yourself, you're easy to sway. You're looking for validation, for reassurance, for someone else to tell you you're enough. And that's exactly where manipulation sneaks in. It offers you approval at a price. But when confidence shows up, the price tag disappears because you're no longer buying what's being sold. Confidence changes the way you respond to pressure. Without it, every argument feels like a battle you need to win. Every guilt trip feels like something you have to resolve. Every silent treatment feels like a punishment you need to escape. But when you're confident, you don't chase, you don't beg, you don't panic. You don't feel the need to explain yourself over and over again. You stand still, you stand tall, and you let your silence speak louder than your words. Manipulation loses its power because it depends on reaction, and a confident man doesn't react. He chooses how to respond. The beauty of confidence is that it creates unshakable value. When you know what you bring to the table, you don't chase anyone who threatens to leave it. You don't fear loss because you know you're not the one losing. Manipulation thrives on the fear of abandonment. If I leave, you'll fall apart. But confidence flips that script. If you leave, I'll still stand. And that posture changes everything. The moment you no longer fear being alone, no one can use loneliness as a weapon against you. Confidence also makes boundaries effortless. You don't have to scream them. You don't have to force them. You don't have to constantly defend them. People can sense your limits before you even state them because confidence radiates certainty. It shows up in your tone, in your body language, in your decisions. When a man is confident, he doesn't need to justify his no. He doesn't need to apologize for his standards. He doesn't need to explain why he won't tolerate disrespect. Confidence communicates it without words, and that silent communication is often stronger than anything spoken. Another strength of confidence is that it kills the need for external approval. Manipulation thrives when someone can dangle approval like a prize, when they can make you feel small and then offer you a pat on the back if you comply. But a confident man doesn't operate on external approval because his validation is internal. He already knows his worth, and because he knows it, no one else can take it away or decide when he deserves it. That independence makes manipulation useless because there's nothing left to control when someone already approves of himself. Confidence also brings calm in the middle of conflict. Without it, conflict feels like chaos. You rush to fix things, to smooth things over, to make sure everyone's happy even at your own expense. But with confidence, you realize not every storm requires your umbrella. You don't have to jump at every lightning strike. You don't have to defend yourself against every accusation. You can stand in the middle of the storm and let it pass, knowing that your identity isn't shaken by noise. That calmness itself is power, because manipulation relies on chaos and confidence thrives in calm. And finally, confidence ends manipulation because it makes you unmovable. You stop being tossed around by guilt, by fear, by pressure, by false promises. You stop letting other people dictate your emotions, your choices, your identity. A confident man isn't arrogant. He's anchored. And when you're anchored, storms don't move you, tactics don't sway you, and manipulation doesn't touch you. That's why confidence is the final key. It's the point where every trick, every tactic, every illusion loses its grip completely, because nothing is more untouchable than a man who knows exactly who he is.